Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to the first Women Plus Water lecture for 2023. I want to begin by acknowledging that all of us are participating today from traditional territories of First Peoples across the country. Those of us in Saskatoon are gathering on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to honouring and supporting the Indigenous peoples, Indigenous cultures, Indigenous values, and Indigenous languages that belong to this land. Water is the lifeblood of people and societies. It connects us, and we pay our respect to the First Nation and Métis ancestors of the Saskatoon region and reaffirm our relationships with one another, but also with the land and waters that are so essential to our health and well-being. I invite those of you joining from other territories today to reflect on and recognize the lands and waters that you call home and set an intention to have a productive and positive discussion today. Welcome. I'm Corinne Schuster-Wallace. I'm a water health researcher. I'm also Associate Director of Global Water Futures and the creator of Women Plus Water. Women Plus Water was established to increase the visibility of women in water and to engage people through the annual lecture series, the expert list, and mentorship opportunities to learn about the gendered impacts of water research, water management, and decision-making. Women Plus Water gives women, young professionals, and allies of all identities opportunities for professional development while empowering a global network of water experts committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and water justice. Women Plus Water, thanks to all of you here and many more people around the world, is a thriving international community where relationships connect people across borders, elevate women's voices, and create space for innovative conversations that redefine inclusive excellence in water. In the last 5 years, over 2,000 people from 45 countries have engaged with the series, and we're absolutely delighted to be growing this inclusive community together with your support. We're also happy to announce that after overwhelming response to the idea last year, registration for the Women Plus Water expert list is now open. This public-facing expert list is designed to connect you with people and opportunities to share your research and expertise on gender and all areas of water on your terms in spaces that are meaningful to you. If you haven't already registered, please visit our website, and I believe it's going to be put in the chat now. Each of our 5 lectures between January and April this year focus on a specific water-related theme, and today's structured conversation is focused on water diplomacy, navigating the space between common goals and competing visions. Around the world, transboundary or shared water resources management and availability are increasingly complex as a result of not only climate change, but other pressures. And negotiations are ongoing in several transboundary regions, including on the Nile River, throughout the Middle East, and also throughout Central Asia. Women have to be at these tables to participate and share their knowledge, experiences, and needs, recognizing that diplomacy happens formally and informally at all levels. For this reason, I'm thrilled that our first event of the year is between internationally renowned experts on this topic. And so, having said that, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Andrea Rowe, who is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Specialist for the Global Institute for Water Security, but also Global Water Futures at the University of Saskatchewan. And Andrea has been instrumental in growing and expanding this lecture series with the support of many of the staff in GIWS and GWF, but also our advisory committee, Dr. Helen Balch, Dr. Lalita Bharadwaj, Dr. Marcus Brinkman, Dr. Saman Ravazi, and Dr. Leila Iman. So over to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Corinne. And I'd like to, first of all, thank all of you who've joined us online today. A few housekeeping notes to start. You are able to listen to today's lecture in French if you would like by clicking the globe-shaped French interpretation button down on the main toolbar. In addition, there will be live English closed captions. I believe there's some technical challenges at the moment, but we are expecting those to emerge by also clicking on a link that will appear on the main bar below. This event will be approximately 1 hour, and all participants will remain muted. Both the English and French versions will be recorded and put on the Global Water Futures YouTube channel. In the last 10 minutes, there will be an opportunity to ask both our host and guest questions. So if you have questions that come up for you throughout today's event, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we will pose those to our invited guests today. I would also like to recognize our sponsors, Global Water Futures, the Global Water Futures Young Professionals, and the Global Institute for Water Security for committing the resources to make today's event and all of the events in this series possible throughout the year. In addition to everyone who's joined us online today, I would like to especially welcome young professionals that are joining us today from the University of Saskatchewan, Laurier, Waterloo, and McMaster. And there will be a great opportunity for the young professionals to stay on at the end and have a few moments of networking with our hosts and guests today. I would like to provide a brief introduction of our hosts, Dr. Kelsey Leonard, guests, Fumin Faru, Elizabeth Cook, Dr. Margot Hurlbert, and Marilyn Fair. I cannot do them justice in this short time, so please do check out their full biographies available on our website, www.womenpluswater.org. First, I would like to welcome our host, Dr. Kelsey Leonard, who holds a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Waters, Climate and Sustainability, and is Assistant Professor in the School of Environment, Resources and Sustainability in the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo. Her research focuses on Indigenous water justice and its climactic, territorial, and governance underpinnings. Welcome, Dr. Leonard. Next, our Dr. Margot Hurlbert is the Canada Research Chair in Climate Change, Energy, and Sustainability Policy and Professor at the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Regina. Her research focuses on energy, climate change, agriculture, and water. Welcome, Dr. Hurlbert. Fumin Faru is a member of the Women in Water Management Network in Central Asia and Afghanistan and a former Director General of the Kabul River Basin. Fumin Faru holds an MSc in Hydraulic Structures from Firdausi University and served as the National Water Affairs Regulation Authority as General Director of the Kabul River Basin, the largest basin in Afghanistan before the Taliban capture of Kabul in 2021. Fumin has extensive experience in transboundary water management, serving in various capacities, including as Acting Director of Water Allocation, Dam and River Advisor, and Hydraulic Structure Design Specialist. Welcome, Fumin. Elizabeth Cook is Senior Manager, Environmental Law at the Environmental Law Institute and Shared Waters Partnership at the Stockholm International Water Institute. She served over 15 years of experience supporting water diplomacy, engagements in conflict-sensitive basins on behalf of CIMI's Shared Waters Partnership Program, the UNESCO Category 2 International Center for Water Cooperation, and EcoPeace Middle East. Welcome, Elizabeth. And finally, last but certainly not least, is Marilyn Fair. She's a Canadian Commissioner on the International Joint Commission. She's a lawyer, writer, strategist, negotiator, and relationship builder who worked extensively with Indigenous organizations on environmental, land, water rights, and governance issues. She, along with 10 First Nation chiefs, was the founding executive director of the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources. She's the author of the book, Denying the Source, The Crisis of First Nations Water Rights, and co-author of Ethical Water. She's a member of the Forum for Leadership on Water, Smart Prosperity's Leadership Council, and a recipient of Canada's Clean 50 Award. Welcome, Marilyn. Well, this is an absolutely wonderful group of folks that we've invited today. And so I'm pleased to turn this over to our expert host for today, Kelsey, who will guide each person through a brief moments to share their work, and then moving on to a constructed conversation. So I'll join you back at the end to moderate the questions, but over to you, Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Akwe Winikasak. It's good to be with you all today. So yes, just to start, we're going to go around and do a bit of introductions to our work and how we really center water diplomacy in the work that we do. And I can sort of kick us all off to start. as was mentioned in the wonderful introductions, and thank you to Global Water Futures and the Women Plus Water, Expert Network for having us here today. I can kick us off and tell you a little bit about my work. I'm based at the University of Waterloo. We have established at the university my lab called the Wampum Lab, and we work specifically on addressing concerns brought to us by Indigenous nations in relation to water justice, climate justice, and ocean justice. And I feel like all of this is very much rooted in the rich history of environmental justice. If we think back to, how that area of work and discipline became sort of emerged within our sciences and the work that we do now, we really have to thank Dr. Robert Bullard for conceptualizing that term, sort of bringing it forward, but all of the community activists and local movement builders across the United States, at that time North Carolina, and other Black and Indigenous communities who have been able to build these justice frameworks. So now we can hopefully have the language and the lexicon to deploy them and really make sustainable changes for our communities. And so that's what we aim to do through water diplomacy in our lab, is really amplify the voices of Indigenous nations, work to have Indigenous-led conservation and justice efforts that protect the ocean, protect the water, and really think also now more emergently in our lab around notions of where water, ocean, climate, and energy intersect. There's, really amazing work in this space, but I think as we are hearing from tribal nations and First Nations that we work with, renewable energy is not energy justice per se. Just because we're building wind farms or we're building solar farms doesn't mean that they are just. And so as we think about what a just transition looks like in our global society and economies, we're really interested in our lab and thinking about what that means for Indigenous peoples, lands, and waters, and the futurity of our nations. And so at the Wampum Lab, wampum is very much near and dear to the nations that we work with, because it has constituted a lot of the treaty agreements, particularly many of the transboundary water agreements in the Great Lakes and throughout the Eastern Woodlands region of what's currently known as the United States and Canada that we work in. And for those that are unfamiliar with wampum, it's harvested from mollusk relatives, quahogs and whelks, that are actually currently threatened due to climate change. And so we see our water diplomacy as activating that knowledge, activating the understanding of where wampum comes from and how it has historically been a tool for justice across our communities. So I'll stop there. Really keen for this conversation to continue. And our next presenter is Elizabeth. Elizabeth, would you like to share?
Of course. Thank you for that warm introduction. So interesting to learn more about your work, Kelsey. Really good afternoon and good evening. I want to say thank you to the Women Plus Water team for organizing this amazing lecture series. It's such an honor to be part of this 2023 inaugural event. My name is Elizabeth Cook. I am a senior manager at the Environmental Law Institute in the United States, and I'm also the process support team lead for the Women in Water Diplomacy Network, supported by the Stockholm International Water Institute and a variety of other partners. I would be amiss to not recognize that a number of our network members are online today from across Africa and Central Asia, even though it's very late there. So very warm welcome to you all. I myself was born in the Mississippi Basin and have had the great honor of supporting water diplomacy processes in a variety of different basins, from the Salva to the Jordan River, more recently in the Nile and Central Asia. And this has really been a great honor of my career. But it really didn't take long to realize that those spaces are incredibly male-dominated spaces so far. And I often found myself and recognized a few other women in those spaces feeling rather alone. And despite this, the women and children, of course, are bearing the disproportionate burden of water insecurity and climate change. So I had the opportunity in 2015 with my dear colleagues at the Stockholm International Water Institute to really focus on the importance of women decision-making in water diplomacy. This enabled us to initiate the Women in Water Diplomacy Network in the Nile with an amazing group of women water decision makers from across that basin. We worked together for a number of years, sharing experience, knowledge, data, really fostering this. I love that you mentioned movement building, Kelsey. It really feels like a community of practice and a movement, really uniquely so. And then in 2021, the network was able to launch in Central Asia and Afghanistan. I had the dear opportunity to meet Fumin and many other amazing women water diplomats from that region. And we were able to start to have more interbasin knowledge exchange, really learning from each other and identifying what are the things that we have in common, how can we support each other, what differences there are in our regions. And unfortunately, an underlying symmetry was that we are facing great barriers to women's participation in high-level decision-making forum. And those barriers are incredibly persistent across generations. I can say that last year we came together with many amazing, I think we were almost 80 women water diplomats from around the world at the World Water Week, and we launched a global strategy for the Women in Water Diplomacy Network with the dear participation of Dr. Fair and others from North America, across Africa, many basins there, and many other areas of the world. And unfortunately, while the Women in Water Diplomacy Network is really focused on fragile and conflict-affected areas, other regions in the world are facing great water insecurity, more and more so, unfortunately. And the needs of fostering inclusive decision-making is always going to be growing, and we have so much to do in this space. So we're really working on advancing this path forward for women, water, peace, and security through the global strategy in the hopes that we can make a major change to the status quo. Those changes don't happen without a great deal of effort. And there's so much energy, I'm sure, with many participants on this call to share experience and really change some of these underlying assumptions that are keeping a diversity of women's voices out of those decision-making spaces. I think, most recently we saw that at COP27, just 7 of the 110 high-level decision makers were women at the COP, making critical decisions for the path forward for a resilient future, affecting all of us. And this, to me, is just remarkable in its exclusion at this day and age, and requires all of society to radically alter that picture and include young people and all types of women and others to make sure we're really reflecting on all of society. And it's really been my great honor to be part of the Women in Water Diplomacy Network and to learn from the incredible women water diplomats such as we have on this call today. So I'll stop there. I'm really looking forward to this discussion and sharing any experience and the questions that might come up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Next up, Fumin.
Hello to everyone, and thank you that invited me to speak about my career and also my opinion about water diplomacy. I wanted to explain about the Afghanistan situation and also my work in water diplomacy and water management. Afghanistan has a 5 major river basin. 4 are transboundary and make up about 90% of the national water resources of Afghanistan. Transboundary cooperation with the riparians is important for the country to meet its growing needs for water, energy, and the food security. Copper River Basin is one of those transboundary basins. Annually, about 21 billion cubic meters of Kabul River flow runs to Pakistan. For both Afghanistan and Pakistan is
very important source of water for their needs, municipal, agriculture, and hydropower. Also, the Cobble River Basin has 8 basins, each of which has its water rights and needs to manage. It's overall for prevention of the conflicts between internal basin, fine cooperation between them needs to provide a comprehensive plans to manage the water. When I was General Director of Cobble River Basin, I lead the comprehensive plan that includes both the implementation of technical and policy. The Cobble River Basin Directory worked on 4 parts: Water Resource Department, Planning Department, Technical Service, and Water Regulation. In the Water Resource Department, we collected data from our station and analyzed the data and prepared the hydrology reports for Planning Department. Planning Department due to local people and government requests prepared the plan, and after that, technical service used the plan and implemented or built or construct the water structures. And the last department that is very important for water diplomacy is the regulation department that's distributed water according to economical rationally, and also established a new water association which manage water at a local level, and also solve the conflicts at national and local level. I have a brief review on my work in the Cobble River Basin, and thank you again.
Thank you so much for that. That's really, really wonderful. And I'm really excited now to turn over to Margot for your thoughts on your water diplomacy.
Thank you, Dr. Leonard. And thank you to all my fellow panelists, such interesting backgrounds and perspectives. Thank you to Women in Water for inviting me. I'm joining from Treaty 4 Territory down in Regina, Johnson Shrama Policy School, and we have offices in Treaty 6 here in Saskatchewan, Canada, as well. And I don't want to repeat anything that's been said by my colleagues about water diplomacy and water institutions that they're involved in, which is so fascinating. And I just applaud you all so much. I'm just so happy to see such involvement and passion around water. My background is in water, but in a little different perspective from the climate change and from an agriculture and an energy perspective. So what I thought I would do is talk about 3 skills or practices around water diplomacy that you've all been talking about in my work in South America and Canada in semi-arid dry regions that I think are really important that women bring to water diplomacy in spades, and that all people in water diplomacy can practice. And the first one is the water institutions we're talking about are really important, but we need to be water diplomats in other sectors and other institutions in order to truly achieve water justice. So I'm very much interested in some of my research colleagues in working in world trade and thinking about the trade of goods and how water and agricultural products is exported in and around the world, because it makes a difference for people and their lives. And I'll come back to this in my third point. So working in other sectors to achieve water justice. And when we think about energy and hydroelectricity in South America, the hydroelectric dams are huge infrastructures of injustice in many occasions. So being active in energy sector and decision-making is really important. So as water diplomats, I see women really understanding how these pieces fit together and being active in all sectors. The second skill set I think women offer and is important is being able to manage in uncertainty. So in climate change, we're experiencing it. It is uncertain what will happen in the future, and we are facing massive tipping points, including permafrost loss, which might happen very quickly, the glacier and the ice sheet melts, and the changing of ocean circulation. And we know here in South America, Central America, that the weather patterns of La Nina and El Nino really impact us. So we're able to manage in this uncertainty, in this world of future uncertainty. And then the third thing that I think is really important in water diplomacy is building bridges. And I'm not meaning infrastructures. Don't get me thinking along an engineering line, but the relational piece. Justice is about relationships. And if we're going to solve peace and justice in relation to the world and climate change, it comes back to water. And I'm working on some really exciting stuff in Future Earths around how do we actually do it and bring it home here in Saskatchewan, where we live in a somewhat water abundant space, how we bring it home into global international water justice. So those are just some of my thoughts. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful thoughts with us. We will go now next, last but not least, to Meryl Ann.
I'll just bring up a PowerPoint very quickly. Okay, perfect. Thanks, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for being invited. I'm in Treaty 1 territory, homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm about 300 meters away from the Red River, so right smack in the middle of the Red River Basin, smack in the middle of the North American continent, pretty much. And I just want to say, in terms of the work that I do, I'll start with this particular slide because it comes from a time long after I started working by an Indigenous woman, but it's really the driving force behind what I do, trying to figure out what is my responsibility, what is the responsibility of humanity to our use of water, our taking of water. We know that life depends on it, but I think often it stops there in terms of understanding what to do next. We often repeat the same decisions that we make over and over and over again, despite the fact that the world is changing very quickly around us. And so my work is driven by trying to figure out what is this responsibility. To me, it's largely about getting our act together as humans and figuring out different ways to make decisions. And the biggest problem I see in water stuff, which is that we tend to exclude the social and economic, social context, the social and environmental context, rather. We tend to think of water for what it can do for us, but not the full context. And it's because of that link that we disempower often the communities and people most directly affected, which is women, children, Indigenous communities. So my work is really all about reconciliation. And I know reconciliation is a bad rap. A lot of people don't like it. I prefer not to look at how the mistakes people have made with it, but actually to look at its true intent, which is, I think of reconciliation as revisioning our future, doing it together, rebuilding the things that we have broken down, that we have built wrongly or badly, restoring ecosystems, peoples, languages, cultures, like restoration. And so in that context, that's what drives me in my work, is reconciliation. And reconciliation in Canada is largely about between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and reconciliation with nature. Because so much of that is about changing the way we do things, I consider myself inherently a feminist. And feminism is about challenging the status quo. That's about everything I do. And that is very an interesting perspective to have for me, particularly given that I'm a water diplomat. I work as a commissioner part-time. Half of my life is, not my whole life, but half of my life is in the IJC as a commissioner. That's a quasi-judicial institution. And it's a diplomatic role. And so I have a constant tension in what I do, but I consider that a feminist approach to diplomacy isn't the traditional role of diplomacy, which is a really funny friend of mine says diplomacy is largely the Al Capone school of diplomacy, which is freeze and nobody gets hurt, right? Do nothing, change very little if there's conflict, just maintain the status quo. Well, the status quo is a status quo created
not by any of us, by people a long time ago. In the case of the IJC, it's created in 1909. Probably not many Indigenous women, Indigenous women, Indigenous men were around at that time. I'm only the fourth woman, and we have our first Indigenous person on the IJC in this current round of commissioners. So it is an institution that needs to be changed in order to adapt to our current world. And that's why I chose part of my work to be there, because reconciliation for me and what I'm about is changing institutions, changing laws, seeking to find the application of Indigenous law, and bettering and changing Canadian law, and of course changing our relationships, because that's the fundamental basis of all of it. And so at the IJC, just because that's a key part of the talk today, my key goals in diplomacy there are, of course, the collaboration among commissioners. Collaboration is not a typical thing in diplomacy. We talk about it, but it's very hard to do it when you have interests, like you can see along. These are all the watersheds that the IJC deals with. Water goes both directions. It's the longest international board in the world. It's very difficult to collaborate sometimes, but that's a key goal that I have. Partnership with Indigenous peoples who are all in all of those watersheds. It's never been really done, certainly not to the extent that we're trying to do it. And also looking at our activities as a commission from a watershed basis, not just the boundary. Fundamental change in the way you look at water to do it that way. And so I will leave it with that, because I've used up my time, and hope that gives you a flavor of the nature of my work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I think it really does set the stage for where we were going to go next in our conversation. And you mentioned a lot of these components of how water can be a very technocratic field. For those listening in, that really is what Meryl and Commissioner Fair was alluding to. Sometimes we center the perspectives of engineers, hydrologists, security experts at the forefront. We tend to not necessarily focus in on the human behavior, social science side of water. And really at its core, water is about relationships and connection and what it does in terms of being able to sustain life around our planet. So I'm wondering if we might be able to go around and sort of explore together, why do we think it still is so much of a technocratic field? How that, that reliance on sort of engineering, hydrology, sort of engineering-based solutions might shape how we see water being governed today, and maybe some of the deficits we see, and maybe what your hopes might be for systemic change. There's a lot in there, and so feel free to kind of take your own approach to the question, but I'm really keen to hear, I kind of see this question as what are some of our challenges around water governance, and how can we maybe, chart a path forward that's also, as you mentioned, Commissioner Fair, maybe along a feminist line. So maybe we'll go back around, and we'll start with you, Elizabeth.
All right. Wow. Thank you. Well, I mean, my first thought really is that water governance is complex. Water is really complex. And if we're only looking at it through a technical lens or an engineering perspective, we're missing huge parts of the story, and we're not going to find sustainable solutions that meet the variety of challenges that water presents for us. It's often the case that where we're talking to stakeholders around the world, and we're really encouraging interministerial cooperation, and that's at the high level. So make sure to bringing in those perspectives, not only from the water ministries and water making decisions, but really bring in foreign policy perspectives, finance, social cultural perspectives, to really bring a diversity of views around the table in order to get a more holistic approach to water governance. I also think it's really important to think about the multiple scales of water governance. Of course, there's the national decision makers, the transboundary, interstate decision makers, but there's a lot of local decision makers and community members that are making important contributions at all levels. And so really it's a multi-level governance structure that is really needed in the water sector. When you think about it in terms of applying that to the realm of water diplomacy, I think it's important to recognize that diplomacy has also really evolved over the years. Kind of traditionally, we've thought of diplomacy like formal diplomats, such as Commissioner Farr and others in this call, playing a formal role on behalf of their governments. However, there's a great deal of water diplomacy taking place at the informal level, where people may not have a formal mandate from their government, but are deeply engaged in diplomatic processes across a basin or between communities. They may be teachers or mayors or faith-based leaders or all sorts of different people contributing to water diplomacy processes. And I think it's really important to have a kind of a whole of society approach to diplomacy, recognizing, of course, people have different roles, and it's important to create linkages between formal and informal water diplomats across communities. I think that's one of the reasons why the Women in Water Diplomacy Network is so important to our community, because we really bring those formal and informal decision makers together for the benefit of all of our knowledge. Yeah, that was a big question, Kelsey. I'm not sure if I got it all. Hopes for change. I mean, there's a million hopes for change. I certainly hope that we'll embrace an understanding of water governance that is, transparent, accountable, and participatory, and embracing both the formal and informal aspects of our communities.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think you really did, bring forward a lot of great ideas and trajectories for the future. And I'm wondering, Fomin, from your experience in Kabul, what water governance looked like for that particular river basin and some of the successes and challenges.
Thank you. Now, at the first, I want the meaning of water diplomacy. Water diplomacy or hydro diplomacy is a method in which water problems are diagnosed, intervention points are determined, and sustainable solutions are provided for those problems. The tool used in the water diplomacy are environmental policy, water management strategy, and also engineering solutions. It's an innovative method and a strategic tool for solving water-related problems in international and also national and local levels. We see water diplomacy as a group of work of different people, local people, technical people, and also decision maker or diplomacy member. In my opinion, there are three groups that can change the system and govern the water. First, local people. Second, technical people like engineers. And third, decision maker or policy maker. But the effect of each one is in water governance is different. Two of them, like local people and technical people, have intangible rules in water governance that we cannot see the effect of the decision of them, but we can see the water government decision because it's tangible. For example, local people face to shortage of water, so they raise their voice. Government must solve the problem of the people. So technical people are hired to find a solution. After the decision maker or policy maker decided which one of the solution is affordable for the governance and choose one. Or different governments plans to develop an area, but local people don't accept the plan. Now, technical people have to find a solution to how an area develops with minimum demand to people or environment, and also people become satisfied and benefit of the project. So I think the water governance, water diplomacy are teamwork of many different type of people. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that's really, wonderful what you were saying there too about how do you bring people together, right? It's not necessarily that we're trying to put forward, ideas around, oh, well, we need to take away the technical side of this work. No, we still need engineers and hydrologists and the technical experts to be a part of this work, but it's how do we bring those other experts in, those social experts, those, traditional knowledge holder experts in, to work together, and be more inclusive in our approaches. So thank you for sharing that. That was wonderful. Margot, you work in so many different basins around the world. I'm sure governance operates differently across all of them. So what are your thoughts on water governance and sort of this technocratic aspect?
Yeah, thank you. In 5 words, we're continuing to experience the patriarchal colonial structures that have existed and people my age have been up against for 5 decades plus. So change is slow, but we know in certain examples, change can be fast. So I was thinking of storm the bastion, but then I thought, ooh, bad taste, storm the Capitol, nothing to do with that. But I think we need to think about 2 things. And one is moving structural technocratic decisions into the realm and leaving them there where they should be. And when it comes to water diplomacy, thinking of it for what it is politicization. So we need to change our thinking about who should be sitting on these water institutions. And it's not the technocrats. When I'm on a board of water people and an engineer is there, they are not expected to be doing water engineering. So I think we should leave the technocrats where they want to be, and we should choose people on the institutions that are into water politics and relation building and reconciliation. And it may mean, because I'm so very tired of having one woman as the token woman or one Indigenous person, I'm sure maybe is how you feel, we need to be in a majority because we end up in an institution that is reifying patriarchal and colonial practices. And as one sole voice, it is impossible to make significant change. So I think those 2 things, making those decision bodies, recognizing it is political. It is not for technocrats to be sitting on there. But second of all, to actually change the whole composure and actually embrace what we see happening in all environmental decision making, which is participatory decision making, where these bodies are actually consulting actively. And I know it's a lot of work, but if you want to sign up for a water institution that's making decisions that are so important, putting in the time of meeting with all the stakeholder and right holder people is an absolute necessity.
Thank you for that. And I think it's a great segue to Marilyn, to your turn for this question. You're enmeshed in one of those institutions that I know, as you mentioned in your presentation earlier, has had, a difficult history with, trying to get the right people at the table. So what are your thoughts on what others have shared and the question?
Sure. First, just on the technology and science aspect, I think there's, I would strongly reiterate, because IJC says it is an institution that is science-based. It makes decisions based on evidence, scientific consensus, et cetera. The challenge that we have, of course, is one where we expand science to not just mean the hard sciences, quote unquote, hard sciences of engineering or water quality, quantity, et cetera, but Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous sciences, soft sciences, looking at, and by soft, I don't mean soft in terms of quality or rigor. I just mean the ones that are seen as being outside of the water and engineering, the water quality, quantity, and engineering, which are the ones that really govern the decision making for the last 120 years or so, right? We want to try to bring in the social context. And that's the context of the local people who live the impact and who are best situated to know whether the solution will work for them and are best situated to implement the solution and need it to be their solution also. So right then, we are talking about a much more diverse set of knowledges that we're bringing in, and what are the processes to do that? And how do you create forums for people to feel that that's a good place, a meaningful place for their time and their knowledge. And so that's our current and active, very big challenge. And in next week, I'm going to an Indigenous knowledge session that is being hosted by Indigenous people for the purpose of figuring out how the IJC can work with them in the Red River Basin. It's super exciting. It's the first time, I think, in our history that we've had such a session. And I want to give a little bit of hope, because there is, in terms of the water justice piece of this and the decision-making piece, it's a small example, but I use it a lot because it gives me hope whenever I think about how hard this work is. In the Red River Basin, we have a board that has, in the Lake Ontario, Lake of the Woods, Rainy River board, they have a whole set of committees and subcommittees that do really interesting work and include deep relationships with Indigenous people for many years, actually now. Probably the most progressive of all of our boards in terms of having those relationships and working in partnership. And they have done some fascinating studies on, and here's the example, the Indigenous nations there had expressed concern about two things: wild rice being decimated by hydro operations, and also sturgeon populations decreasing because of, again, hydro operations. Because of the inappropriate levels of water at different times of the year. So we did studies with them for a number of years. And at the end of the day, we were able as an institution to change and require the hydro developers, operators in the Lake of the Woods Basin to change their operations to better allow for wild rice harvest, and increase wild rice production, and also help restore sturgeon populations by changing the timing of the water levels so that the reds, which is where the spawning grounds are, can survive. And that would never have happened but for a deep and trusting partnership with Indigenous people who took the time to explain and believed in us, and we believed in them to be able to do this. And we provided resources for that. And so it can be done. And this is an international watershed. This is cross-boundary. So we had Canada-US support for both of this. So I just want to say that there's really meaningful ways that knowledges can work together to actually make change. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful example. And all of you have shared actually what would sort of be a lead into our next question about the differences between international, national, and local participation in water. And so I might even recommend that we move to our third question that we had for each other for today, which is really thinking about how, with what you shared earlier, each of you, it's a recognition that on that technical side, there is pluralism in scientific traditions. It's not just one scientific tradition. We're trying to bring multiple sciences together to understand our relationships to water. And I think there's a really urgent need for that science to also be, women-led and to, have women's leadership. And so our question for you next is, how do women's water knowledges shape the water diplomacy that you see in your work? And how can we start to amplify the excellent work that's already being done, like some of the work that you mentioned, Meryl Ann? So I might encourage us, anyone who feels like they want to start with that question could just kind of, shoot a hand up and we'll turn it over to you, or we can go back around. How do we amplify more women's water knowledges and diplomacy? I think, Margot, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I had a question in the chat and I didn't know how to respond to it. I thought I was going to, and then anyways. So I'll kind of answer that question around decision-making and get into this whole science and evidence-based. So I think we need to really critically assess what we think of as science and what we think of as evidence-based. So if we were only making policy decisions and choices based on evidence and science-based evidence, then we would not have a democracy. So I think we need to think about that. Like, evidence has a really important part, but that's where I think we need to keep evidence with the scientists and the evidence. And we do need to think more expansively around what is science, because once we get into that evidence-based science, often we see that hierarchical idea that, well, the best science is statistically proven, blind, experimental, and then qualitative research methods aren't as evidence-based. So we get into that hierarchy when we start using that evidence-based policy language. And I think we just need to keep talking more about knowledge and being respectful of knowledge and science. And Indigenous knowledge, local knowledge is really important knowledge. Elevate that knowledge, as Mary Ellen was speaking, Mary Ellen was speaking, elevate it and flip our hierarchical expectations in these decision-making bodies. So evidence is important, but recognize when it's a political decision and not let it be about small things. So water quantity, for instance, people like to say that it's a technocratic, it's about the hydrologist telling us what the water sharing arrangement is. But it's so complex because when we actually balance the water coming between Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba is a really important thing. Does it happen in what time of year? And when do we actually do the balance? And when do we plan for the shortages? And how does that happen? And that's not for hydrologists and technocrats to make decisions on. That's where a social science, an Indigenous knowledge keeper, local people understanding the dynamics and having input into those decisions is so very important.
Thank you so much for that. Is there anyone else that wants to tag on to what Margot shared or share other thoughts about how we promote more women's water knowledges in this work? Elizabeth?
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more, Dr. Margot. I think really important, and I often find myself in this position, bringing this perspective into water dialogues. It's that science, research, social science shows us that gender inclusive peace processes, including environment, natural resource related processes, when they are inclusive, they are more sustainable. They are less likely to relapse, which is a major problem in many of the fragile and conflict-affected regions of the world. So when we have inclusive processes where women are more represented, where young people are represented, where Indigenous perspectives are represented, those peace processes last longer. And this has a wealth of research behind it. So it's not anecdotal anymore. We have a great body of research to show us that. Yet we're so far away. Recent research has shown that I think 93% of peace processes are endorsed completely by men without women signatories. Okay, so this is already a very poor indicator of where we are and the great space for improvement. The other point I'd like to make on this is that I think we just all have a responsibility to be more curious, to ask some really important questions along the way. How does this effort affect the communities in the region? How are those communities affecting a process? What are our unconscious assumptions that we're making? And really be curious and to really explore how we can do better. Clearly the status quo is not working and is not a path forward for the future. So we really have to, think what target groups do we think are important and who we are leaving out of the decision-making room, who we picture as critical voices and actors, and who we are completely leaving out of who we think are as high-level decision-makers. We have to understand, of course, that water governance, water diplomacy is definitely not the reflection of the history. And in order to unpack that, we need to ask questions, undertake analysis, and really it's on us as stakeholders and decision makers of all kinds to put those questions forward to our decision makers and not make life too easy. We have a very complex world and we have to, dive into it. So I'll stop there, Kelsey, but I just love this conversation.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for that. And I see Andrea might be coming back in soon, but maybe we'll have time just for 10-second last thoughts, Marilyn, if you want to close us out on this conversation.
Sure. I have three things that I try to do. One is just ask the question, how would this impact women? Or how are women involved? And most of the time I don't know the answer. So that means create a process so you can get the answer. You just got to get people in the room. The second, really ask yourself, are the participants focused on collaboration? I don't know if it's just a woman thing, but I do know that the minute you start saying, we need to collaborate, it brings more people in the room. And inherently, it just seems to be women seek to collaborate more. This isn't a general rule. I mean, this isn't a universal rule, but it is. It just seems to be, to me, in my experience, collaboration leads to more women being involved. And also, I just think as an individual in a position of water diplomacy, it is one of my personal responsibilities to get other women involved. So I try very hard with young people to find positions for them, to find out what they want to do, to see if I can make the connection. That's just my own personal thing. But I think we could all do that because I got here because other people helped me get here too, right? I'm of the age where most of those people were men, actually. But I want to change that. I want all of us to be able to get women, and that I would be one of the people that help get people more involved. So those are the three things that I would say.
I love ending on those three things. So we'll turn it back over to the organizers because that is some really great calls to action that we all can take away for today.
Well, thank you so much, Kelsey, for hosting, Marilyn, Elizabeth, Bhuvan, and Margot for your answers. This is such a thought-provoking conversation, and I know that we could carry this on for at least another hour, so we'll have to think about that in the future. But I know we're already at time, but I would like to ask you two quick questions that have been posed in the Q&A, if you don't mind. And, one of the questions from Alice Bowman-Dentner was, how do we ensure informed decision-making? And it's important. I agree that one has to be clear about roles and responsibilities, but making decision-making inclusive is not enough. So, and this kind of goes well with the second question, which is about, even as we integrate Indigenous and marginalized knowledge, how do we take care not to fall back on the colonial tendency of extraction and appropriation, which ends up obscuring the contributions of the marginalized people to development? And so I don't know if anyone would like to answer sort of either or both of those questions. It's one thing to be, of course, we want to be more inclusive, but how do we make sure that it's also accountable? And how do we also make sure that it isn't extractive? So if any of you would like to jump in and answer those questions, that would be great.
I'll tackle the second one just because, to me, it comes down to one of the aspects of reconciliation that I believe in very strongly is that we as all people need reconciliation with nature. We have to figure out our own path to how to do that. But I just think this idea, the way to minimizing or avoiding deeply extractive, very harming issues is if you believe and really feel that you are part of a connected web where water is part of your whole family. It's part of your existence. It's not something you can just harm. I think that's part of that reciprocal gift thing from the beginning. And it's really hard to figure out how to do that. But I just keep trying to remember every day that that's the most fundamental reconciliation is between us and nature and water. And what does that look like in terms of an institutional law or a relationship? So hard question, not easy answer.
Yeah, I would agree with that in many ways. And I think, for the second question, I think what we're also seeing now is we need to be asking ourselves as researchers, everyone, no matter what your background is this my story to tell? Because I think there's often a lack of authenticity, a lack of reflection and reflexivity on positionality. We have so many Indigenous peoples and Indigenous scientists who are able to carry out their own research for their own communities. And so we need to be careful of sort of the extractive helicopter research because the communities can tell their own stories. There is still a need for great allyship and allies in certain instances, but allyship doesn't mean that you're the principal investigator or that, you know, you're the main lead on the project. It means you take a supportive role and you let others come into those leadership positions like Meryl Ann was describing earlier. It's like you put that supportive hand there to lift people up, but you don't take all of the credit and the kudos and potentially the monetary benefits that come from the work that we do as academics and researchers and scientists. And ultimately, I think the best, you know, tool for understanding, you know, is this my place, is just to ask that question. Is this my story to tell, and why? If you don't have a really good answer for that, then it's probably not your story to tell. It's probably not your research to do, and just take a step back.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your answers and this conversation. It really has been wonderful to hear from you today. And so thank you for everyone who attended today's event as well. Our next lecture will be February the 9th, 2023, and we will be discussing Women Water Networks as a Catalyst for Change in honor of the United Nations International Day for Women and Girls in Science, which is Saturday, February the 11th, 2023. And that will be hosted by Dr. Layla Eman, guests Dr. Lee Lee and Dr. Ellen Wall from the Women Advancing Rivers Network, and Jennifer Mandeville, environmental educator with the Swarovski Water School. Please register for the event on our website, and we're looking forward to seeing you next month. We will be transitioning now over to a brief conversation with the Global Water Futures Young Professionals. So if you are part of the Young Professionals Network, please feel free to stay on, and we will unmute you and transition from the webinar format so that you're able to ask our hosts and guests questions about their career path and how they have come to have the water careers that they're currently working on today. So it's a great networking opportunity. And just as Stacy is transitioning us over into that format, I would like to thank all of the technical staff who work on the Women in Water team. Stacy Demansky, Fred Rybin, Jesse Widow, Sean Ahmed, Viviana Barrera-Nino, and Yolande Chason for doing the French interpretation today. All of your work is much appreciated and required to make this conversation happen. So we look forward to seeing you all again for our next event. And thank you for signing in today. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the hashtag Women Plus Water on Twitter, and we'll do our best to answer them there.